We have so much PC hardware news to talk about today, but let's start with this because I know everybody's interested in the 5090, 5080. All of that should be coming very soon, but how powerful will it be? And according to this latest leak, not just how powerful will the 5090 be, but how cut down will the 5080 be relative to the 5090? Because this could be an unprecedented performance gap between the 80 series and the 90 series. So the headlines we're seeing here from a variety of sites are things like RTX 5090 32 gigabytes. So hey, 32 gigabytes VRAM up from 24 on the 4090, so an increase there. RTX 5080 at 16 gigabytes, so same VRAM capacity as the 4080, but not getting upgraded. And apparently 5090 over 20,000 cores and 600 watts, whereas the 5080 over 10,000 cores and 400 watts. Now that's interesting because that's 150 watts up for the 5090 over the 4090, and 80 watts up for the 5080 over the 4080. But look at this core differential, 20,000 cores versus 10,000 cores. So it's looking like the 5090 could have double the VRAM and double the cores over the 5080, potentially meaning an unprecedented performance gap between the 80 and 90 tiers. But where is all this information coming from? This is not official from NVIDIA. This is leaks and rumors. Now that being said, it's looking like the leaks are coming from none other than Kopite7Kimi. If you follow the GPU leaks and rumors space, Kopite7Kimi is one of the most prolific and accurate sources. That being said, not every prediction Kopite has made has come to pass. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean Kopite is wrong on things that don't end up panning out, because it can also mean that plans change behind the scenes prior to launch, or it could have outdated information. So the amount of things Kopite has leaked accurately, my general kind of like, is this a BS meter kind of is actually on the like low BS from Kopite, but doesn't necessarily mean everything would be correct. I would assume that Kopite has some sort of sources within some sort of maybe somewhere in the chain, either at NVIDIA or more likely maybe at a board partner, something like that. Anyway, the point is that's where this information seems to be coming from. But again, let's dive into this a little bit more, because if we look at this, here we go, kind of side by side. By the way, all my sources will be linked in the video description. Here we go. So we've got 5080 versus 5090. And we're seeing it at, again, 21,760 cores versus 10,752 cores. So that is pretty much double the cores on the 5090 versus the 5080. And also look at the memory bus. We're looking at 512-bit bus for the 5090, and 256-bit bus for the 5080. That would be double. Both of them with GDDR7, and it's at 32 gigabytes versus 16 gigabytes. The only thing that's not doubling is the power consumption at 600 versus 400, but man, 600 is super high. Now, he's not specifying whether this is total board power or total, or TGP or TBP, in other words, which can be a different metric and could be more concerning. I mean, 600 watts is a lot. Now, I will say that one of the things that I feel like Kopite did get wrong on the previous generation of leaks with the 40 series was there being some monster 600 watt 4090, which ended up coming in at 450 watts. Although, board manufacturers could, I think, do extreme overclocking designs that could support up to 600 watts through the power connector. Now, some power connectors ended up catching on fire. Well, I mean, melting. But anyway, the point is, this looks like some pretty monster specs. Now, what does this mean in terms of performance? And what do I mean by this being an unprecedented gap between the 80 series and the 90 series? Well, first of all, let's talk performance a little bit. Now, not in this latest round of leaks and rumors, but in a previous round of leaks and rumors from Kopite again, the performance target was given as the 5080, claiming a 10% performance boost over the 4090, so the previous generation flagship and our current most powerful GPU. Now, that would mean that if the 5080 is coming in at 10% faster than a 4090, if those performance targets are true, and if the actual product lives up to the performance targets, then that would mean that the 5090 could be insanely powerful because if it's, memory bandwidth, its cores, everything is like doubled compared to the 5080. I don't know if that means you actually double performance because, game performance doesn't necessarily scale linearly with cores and memory bandwidth, but it could be a significant performance boost over that. So then if we look at something like, this will be a bit of a light background, so watch out for your eyes here. But if I go to Tech Power-Ups, GPU database, we can now kind of play around with some stuff here. So let's look at the performance targets, but then let's also look at what I mean by this being so unprecedented. So if we look at the 3080, for example, the 3080 versus the 3090. So the 3080 versus the 3090, the 3080 was almost on par with the 3090. Like there was not a massive performance or spec differential here. The 3080 had 8,704 cores, whereas the 3090 had 10,496. So yeah, the 3090 had more, but it was nowhere near double, not even close to double. And if we look at things like the bus width, the 3090 had a 384-bit bus, and the 3080 had a 320-bit bus. So that was, again, definitely cut down, but nowhere near half, right? So there's a massive difference there. And now if we look at the 40 series, things have been moving more in this direction, but it's still not as extreme as what we're seeing on the 50 series here. The 4080 versus the 4090, the 4080 has just under 10,000 cores, and the 4090 has a little over 16,000 cores. So we're looking at, a pretty big bump in cores, but once again, it's not double, right? It's not double. And then if we look at the bandwidth here, the 4090 at 384-bit and the 4080 at 256-bit. So again, it's a larger difference than what we saw with the 30 series, but again, it's not half, right? Whereas now, if we look at these if we look at these specs, at least as rumored, well, this looks pretty crazy because, again, they have another kind of summary of the chart here at videocards.com, again, where it's basically half the cores, half the bandwidth. So I'm just saying that this looks like unprecedented levels of spec difference between the 80 class and the 90 class. Now, what does that mean? Well, if it means that the 5080 comes in at a very lower price point, maybe relative to what we saw in the previous generation, with the 4080 coming in way too expensive at $1,200, then maybe I'm okay with that, right? Because if it keeps the price tag down on the 5080, fine. But if what it means instead is that the 5080 is just as expensive as, the last generation of 80 class product, but the 5090 is just extremely powerful and they price it at some insane price tier, like $2,000, $3,000, then I'm going to be upset. Okay. So what I think about this largely rides on the how that pricing differential works out. So, if the 5090 maintains the 4090 price tag of around $1,500, and if the 5080 is half the specs but also half the price, and actually gets us an 80 class product at around the $800 range or so, then actually I'd be like, 5080, if it actually is about 10% faster than a 4090 or even matches a 4090 performance and comes in around $800, and 16 gigabytes of VRAM, if it is around that price point, 16 gigabytes of VRAM, still pretty good. It would have been nice to get more. Then I'll probably be okay, fine. But if the 5080 is coming in at more like that $1,200 price point, that's where, especially then if the 5090 is then double that price, that's where things could get a little bit rocky. So if we do actually then start diving into the performance a little bit again, though, so if we go off the 5080 has a 10% performance over the 4090 target, again, we don't know if that's actually true. We don't know any of this is actually true, but let's just roll with the speculation a bit. It's fun, right? So if we look at the 4080 up to against the 4090, Tech Power Up has it as 26% performance uplift here. In my testing, it's closer to a 30% or so, sometimes even larger lead for the 4090. It can depend on what exactly you're testing here, but if we call it a 30% lead for the 4090, And then if we beat that by another 10%, then you could look at your jump from the 4080 to the 5080 as being, maybe a 40%, performance uplift generationally. But then that would mean that the 5090 could be coming in with a really nice performance uplift over the previous generation, right? And now, if we look at what do we think about this kind of performance uplift, if we again kind of look at the previous generations and how they went, the 3080 versus the 3090 performance-wise was only a 14% gap. That's what I mean about the 80. With the 30 series, the performance and specs were very close. But if we look at the 3080 to 4080 performance jump, we did get like a 50% performance jump. That being said, it also came with a massive price tag increase, which made the 4080 not all that exciting. So then if we look at it that way, okay, so then 4080 to 5080, if that comes in at more of like a 40% performance bump, we're losing a bit there. But if it comes with a price cut, I'm less upset about that, right? Anyway, we'll have to see how all of this goes. We definitely expect the 50 series soon-ish. The rumors are still conflicted between end of 2024 versus beginning of 2025, but I'd say lately it seems like the beginning of 2025 rumors seem to be kind of taking the lead in terms of what we'll likely end up actually seeing on the market. And as we lead into the next generation, we're also going to see the 40 series kind of drying up. We're already seeing signs of the 4090 stock running out in places like Germany, with fewer models available and prices increasing. So one thing that was really kind of unusual with the 40 series was how much 30 series supply was still available, which meant that NVIDIA kind of were caught in a position where if they had brought the cards like the 4080 and the 40 series in general in at competitive price points, then their 30 series stock is going to have trouble selling, right? Which, I mean, the consumer would be fine with, but the board partners and NVIDIA probably wouldn't be fine with. Whereas that was coming off of a crypto boom, right? So after that crypto boom, they skyrocketed their production for the 30 series and all of that. So if we don't have that going on right now with the 40 series, and if they kind of ramp down production on the 40 series in time, then there'll be less competition between the 40 series and 50 series on the market compared to what we saw with the 30 series and the 40 series previously. So that could be one thing that could make pricing maybe more reasonable on the 50 series. But the elephant in the room on all of this is that AMD has signaled that they're not planning on competing at the highest end tier. So if AMD has no competition for the 5090 and 5080, then that could mean that NVIDIA might try some really aggressive, not aggressive negatively, but really high pricing. Try some really, if they don't really have competition. So we'll have to see what goes on with that, because speaking of not having competition, if we look at the most recent published kind of GPU market share stats, we definitely see NVIDIA dominating. So there's like an article here about it from WCCF Tech, but they're getting their information from, I think, John Petty Research. If we look at this, we can see that actually GPU shipments went up in Q2 of 2024 overall. But if you look at market share, Intel lost the 2% market share it had in Q2 of 2023. It's been down to 0% market share for Q1 and Q2 of 2024. And AMD fell from 17% market share in Q2 of 23 down to 12% for Q1 of 24 and stayed at 12% for Q2. Whereas NVIDIA has been taking the Intel and some of AMD's market share and jumped to 88% for Q1 and Q2 of 2024. So if AMD's already, struggling with their market share versus NVIDIA, and they don't have any high-end competition, it does kind of beg the question of what sort of pricing NVIDIA will end up targeting, especially when they can sell their silicon for a lot more money as AI products. So we'll have to see what happens. The elephant in the room, though, is also, okay, what's Intel going to do with Battle Mage? Because, again, their market share dropping to 0%, but they haven't released a product in a while. What about Battle Mage? Well, we do see some leaks of some benchmarks on Geekbench for a new Intel Arc Battlemage G21 GPU that apparently has 20 Xe2 cores and 12 gigabytes memory and a clock speed at 2850. Now, the performance numbers that it's actually showing from Geekbench with, I think it's an OpenCL test, only put it in line with something like an Arc A770 or an RTX 4060. So nothing too spectacular. But also, this would be early tests. We could possibly get driver updates. This might not be final silicon. And this also the A770 previous generation product was a 32 core offering, whereas this is a 20 core offering. So it is possible that the bigger chips from this generation could end up being fairly performant, and Intel's drivers have been getting a lot better. So I'm actually pretty excited about this. Also because we're seeing the new laptops. Lunar Lake laptop reviews just came out a couple of days ago, and they do feature that next-gen Arc GPUs inside of them. And if you look at reviews like this from Notebook Check, they have taglines like, it's featuring the fastest iGPU currently on the market. Interesting. Now, if we dig into their performance testing, there's certainly still some tests where the AMD processors with their iGPUs come out ahead, for sure. So if we pull up, where's the GPU testing here? In gaming, let's see if we can get to some GPU testing. PC Mark, I don't really like the canned benchmarks especially for Intel GPUs, because a lot of times they seem to overperform in the like 3D Mark tests and things like that versus actual games. If we get into the actual game testing for various games, like we could look at like Witcher 3, for example. Let me make myself tiny and out of the way. If we look at Witcher 3, we can see here that at 1080p ultra settings, the Radeon 890M is still winning. If we set the baseline as this new Intel Arc graphics here, we can see a 15% lead for the 890M in that test. But if we switch up the game testing like GTA 5, okay, now we've got the 890M with a 38% lead, Final Fantasy 15. Well, here we're actually seeing the Intel Arc graphics coming out on top, at least if you go into full speed mode. So there is that. Strange Brigade, again, if the Intel Arc graphics are set to full speed mode, they're actually coming out at the top of the chart on this one. Dota 2 Reborn, it's coming out fairly high up on the list as well. So again, it depends on the test. We could look at some other tests as well, but I'll link all my sources in the video description. My point here is mostly just to say that, okay, this is enough that Notebook Check is saying it's the fastest iGPU currently on the market. Again, it depends on what test you're running, but it is promising. That being said, I was looking at the specs for Intel's Battlemage desktop GPUs versus what we're seeing in their Lunar Lake laptops. And if I'm understanding the spec sheets correctly, I think the Lunar Lake laptops might be using TSMC's 3 nanometer process, whereas I think Battlemage is supposed to be using 4 nanometer process. I could be wrong on that, but that's what I understood looking at these spec sheets. So maybe their discrete GPUs might not be quite as exciting as the better process node is showing us on Lunar Lake. But either way, the Lunar Lake chips and laptops in general are showing pretty good performance overall, both with CPU and GPU and for battery life, which is good news for Intel because they've been in a bit of a struggle lately, financially, as well as with their latest CPU generations with the 13th and 14th series. On that note, there are reports of Intel releasing another microcode update to further address Raptor Lake instability. So they'd already issued an update that was supposed to fix this, but apparently they found an additional thing to fix. So there's an additional microcode update coming in for this one. The difference on this one is that the microcode and BIOS code requesting elevated core voltages, which can cause VMIN shift, especially during periods of idle and or light activity. And that's what this latest one is trying to fix. Whereas the previous one was, I don't think, so much focused on the idle or light activity as when that shift was taking place. Anyway, so the point is, keep your eye out if you're on a 13th or 14th gen Intel chip for another microcode update to further help with these instability problems. But to be clear, none of these are solving stability issues that have already been caused by chip degradation. These are just helping chips that haven't yet degraded not degrade. So anyway, we're hopeful that Intel's future CPUs are going to get them back on track, because I would love to see competition in the marketplace rather than just one being completely dominant over the other. That being said, AMD's latest 9000 series has not been impressive from a gaming performance standpoint, so a lot of people are eagerly awaiting the X3D chips. Well, the latest rumors on that are that we are going to get a 9600 X3D, and that we'll get the 9800 X3D fairly soon. Rumors are pointing to end of October, beginning of November, as kind of the announcement and launch date for the X3D chips. But then that the 9900 X3D and 9950 X3D could end up coming a lot later, being pushed into next year. I wonder if the original plan was for the 9800 X3D to also come out a lot later, but that the lackluster sales, at least from gaming, for gaming systems for the 9000 series, could potentially be pushing AMD to get a fast gaming chip out there sooner than later. Especially, I think Intel's supposed to be having another desktop chip come out very soon. So if Intel kind of takes that gaming crown, maybe people aren't worried about those stability issues anymore with the new series, which theoretically shouldn't have those stability problems, then maybe AMD would want to fire back with some X3D chips to make sure they have that gaming crown, right? As far as those kind of launch dates go, we've seen some rumor for the end of October, but like I said, those are also just for the 9800 X3D, with the 9950 X3D, 9900 X3D apparently having some new features and coming out a bit later. But then we're also seeing some rumors arguing that it'll be early November. So we'll have to see what comes of that. Now, speaking of the Ryzen 9000 series not being that exciting from a gaming standpoint, that does seem to be causing some pricing slide on the chips to try to make them more attractive against their 7000 series predecessors, which offer similar gaming performance for less money. It's looking like Micro Center has cut the 9950X down to $589, the 9900X down to $439, and the 9700X down to $319. Now, for all of these new 9000 series chips, AMD didn't launch a new motherboard set yet. However, it's looking like that is now coming soon, and we are getting pricing information on it. It's looking like Newegg has listed at least ASRock's X870E motherboards priced from as low as $199 up to $449. Now that's the X870E, so that's the higher end boards. So do keep that in mind when looking at the pricing, but that's ASRock's lineup. So yet to see what the pricing will look like from other manufacturers, but that's what we have from ASRock. Now, some of those leaks about the 9800 X3D coming early November were actually coming from Gigabyte's conference talking about their upcoming motherboards as well. That's where some of that kind of leak and rumor stuff came from. So anyway, in other GPU news, it's looking like MSI has an RTX 4070 Ti Super Gaming Slim version that will be Stalker 2 themed. I know a lot of people are eagerly anticipating Stalker 2, so if you want a GPU to match, it looks like MSI will have you covered. Not a lot of information exactly on release date and availability, but we'll have to kind of wait and see on that. Now, in other kind of interesting news, how about the PS5 Pro and its new AI upscaler with PSSR? Well, Digital Foundry has a new video that I highly recommend you guys check out. Again, all my sources will be linked in the video description, where they were actually able to get hands-on with the PS5 Pro in a variety of games, as well as get some captured footage of it, which they can then analyze in the same scenes up against a PS5 in like performance and fidelity modes. And so you can get a much better idea about how the PSSR upscaler is doing. It does seem to resolve a lot more detail, but it looks like its temporal stability in motion does still have some flickering. So this being an AI model, it should continue to be trained and updated and hopefully can resolve some of those temporal stability issues. But it does show a lot of advantages over upscalers like FSR. So anyway, it's looking like it's already better than FSR. Whether it's as good as DLSS, hard to say. Kind of in my, from what I've seen, it looks like from its temporal stability side of things, it's not quite there yet. But from a detail reconstruction, it does look quite good. So anyway, we'll have to see what comes of it once the console actually launches. Sounds like my kids are getting home, so let's wrap this up quick. I was going to mention that with things like the PS5 Pro coming out here, fighting for that hardware crown for at least consoles, Nintendo has been directly quoted as saying they don't want to get dragged into performance console wars, and that's just not their thing. And they're talking about their Nintendo Museum kind of advertising their long-term strategy about not competing on the highest-end hardware. With their only console, I think, to really compete for the performance, not necessarily crown, but at least parity, was like GameCube. And it didn't sell super well, whereas things like the Switch, which came out with fairly low-end hardware even at the time, and now it's running pretty old, selling like hotcakes because people want the software. So anyway, speaking of software, we are going to be getting a Horizon Zero Dawn remaster coming to PC as well as PS5 on October 31st. Now, this will once again require a PSN network sign-in, so account for PSN required on PC. This has been the most controversial aspect of PlayStation's move to publish more of their games on PC, is that PSN account login. Some people just resent the account login, especially if it's a single-player game, but other people have a pretty legitimate concern that they cannot legally buy the game in their country because PSN isn't supported. Seems like a pretty major issue. So, anyway, the good news appears to be that even on PC, it looks like if you already own Horizon Zero Dawn, you can get the remastered version for a $10 upgrade. So that's at least pretty nice, that you can get it with just a $10 update. And it does sound like they have done a lot to update the game, including, it sounds like, re-recording some conversations and reshooting the motion capture. And they're trying to claim bringing it up to parity, visuals-wise and sound quality-wise and everything with Horizon Forbidden West, which does look significantly better than Horizon Zero Dawn. So I'm not sure this is the kind of game that really needed a remaster, but if you already have the original game and can get it for $10 as an upgrade, cool. I mean, it looks like it'll be $50 for people who don't already own the game, but if you did already own the game, $10 for the update, neat. Now, speaking of that controversial PlayStation Network requirement, there's been a lot of news about a Nexus mod that disabled PSN or bypassed it for God of War Ragnarok. However, that has been pulled. Now, there was a lot of speculation on whether Sony was coming after the mod creator. However, that has been updated. It looks like the mod creator took it offline himself just due to fear of there eventually being a Sony pushback against it or some kind of legal troubles. Saying, in short, that was my personal decision to remove the mod since it has become way too popular and people started promoting it on Steam forums as well, thus generating tons of attention. I just wanted to avoid the possible threats from the Sony side, even though the code has never touched any of their products in memory. You never know, it's really a gray area to me. So it looks like it was just the mod creator doing it, just kind of getting scared that there might be pushback from Sony. Speaking of Sony and gaming, though, it looks like they're launching a new OLED monitor, which will be a 480 hertz monitor that does have DisplayPort 2.1 support. So one of the very few monitors out with DisplayPort 2.1 support, which is pretty cool. Although this headline's a bit misleading because I think the 480 hertz one is a 1440p display. The 4K display is an IPS panel, not an OLED. So do keep that in mind if you're taking a look at this headline. Anyway, with my kids home, I think I've got to wrap up the video for today. Hopefully you guys found the video useful and or interesting. Feel free to support the channel and what I do here by clicking the join button down below, and you can see what little benefits come with that when it pops up. Anyway, totally understand not everybody's in a position to do that, and thank you to viewers, subscribers, channel members, commenters, everybody. We passed 200,000 subscribers yesterday. I never envisioned this channel ever reaching anywhere near this size, so massive thank you to everybody, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.